Hi guys, so today I'm going to show you how to remove intake manifold on this E46 316 Ti Compact BMW. This car has N42 engine, but this procedure also works on other models with N42 and N46 engine. This is a fairly common procedure. You have to remove the intake manifold when you replace CCV system, crankshaft speed sensor and other sensors, or when you have to work on your starter motor. First you have to remove this intake cover and airbox, and then you can go ahead and remove this cover plate here, and then we have to remove the microfilter housing, and then we remove the fuel rail and some other wiring harnesses, and then we can unscrew a couple of bolts and nuts, and then we can finally take out the intake manifold. There are a couple of bolts you have to remove which are very hard to reach. The first one is underneath this ICV control valve, and you have to reach it by hand in a very tight space. So it's best to make a very small wrench or buy a very small wrench so you can access that bolt over there. And the second bolt is right over here underneath the car. So you have to lift the car on the left side, and then you can go underneath the car and use a couple of extensions and unscrew that bolt. So this is the hardest part of this job. Let's just get into it. First you have to remove this intake cover. So you can do that by removing two pins. You can use side cutting pliers to gently pry out the pin, and now you can remove the clip and the whole assembly. Next we will be removing microfilter housing. So you just turn these three clips 90 degrees, and the top cover should slide out of its position. Then we remove the filter and we undo this cable holder, and then we have to remove 4 T30 torque screws. You can use power tools for this job. It will make it faster, but you know, I'm an old-fashioned guy, so I'm going to do it the old way, by hand. Now we can remove the whole tray like this. Now go ahead and take out the cables. This is the charging cable for the battery and some wiring. You just pry the cables out of this rail and put it away. Now I want to remove this top cover here, and so I will be using 10mm socket to undo the screws. Actually, there are a couple of nuts you have to remove, and here is the second one. Now you can pry out the cover. You just pull it towards yourself, and as you can see, this cover has a couple of locators here, and these are the 2 pins that fit into those 2 holes. So make sure when you are reinstalling everything back together, you catch these 2 pins with those 2 holes, otherwise top of the cover will rub against the microfilter housing, and this will cause wear on the cover, and that's not what we want. Now we have to remove the airbox. The airbox is attached with 2 10mm bolts, which we have to unscrew. Then we can take the bolts out, and next we have to undo this metal clamp over here. This is a 6mm or a flathead. So you just unscrew this bolt to release the metal clamp. Make sure that you release it enough so the rubber boot fits over the ICV valve. I think this should be enough. Okay, so now we have to remove a couple of things. The first thing is this mass airflow sensor, which is connected to the airbox. It has 2 pins which you have to squeeze and pull out the connector. And the second thing we have to remove is, let me see if I can show you. We have to remove this vacuum hose over here. So you can just pull it out like this. And the sensor is best when you use both hands. Let me see if I can do it with one hand only. It's a bit tricky to get this connector off, but here it is. So this is the connector. It has 2 pins which you have to squeeze, and then you can take it out. Now we can finally take out the airbox. You just lift it up and then use your fingers to slip the intake boot over the ICV valve like this, and it should be good to go. Okay, now don't lose the clamp. Next we have to remove the fuel line, which is this stainless steel part over here. So we have to remove 2 10mm bolts. The first one is here and the second one is here. You have to move the fuel line out of the way to access the bolt. Make sure you don't drop the bolts inside the engine bay. You could have quite a bad time finding that bolt again. Okay, so the first one is out, and then we take out the second one. Don't drop it. And then we can undo this wire harness. Okay, so this is now out of the way, and we also have to remove this vacuum hose. The vacuum hose has a system that keeps it in place, and you have to press down on two tabs on the side to release the connector, so you have to press it quite hard. Okay, and it's out. Don't get scared by this orange mayonnaise like stuff. This is normal because I drive short distances, so this is basically just some condensation in the oil. So this is not like a blown head gasket. This is normal if you don't drive enough, as I do in the winter time. Now we can lift out the fuel line. You just have to pull it out carefully and then you can move it out of the way. It's best to set it aside like this, so it doesn't interfere with any of our work. Next, we have to remove all the connections. First, we can remove this idle control valve sensor. So you have to... shit! I broke off the tab, so that sucks. But now at least I can pull out the connector like this. Then you can pull out this connector here. You have to raise this part here with a flat screwdriver, and then you can pull out the connector like this. Then we can undo the main harness. I'm going to use a flat screwdriver to release the holding attachments. So this is a bit tricky. Okay, so the first one is undone. Then we can remove the second one. So this is now free, and we have another connector here on the ICV valve. You just pull it out, and so this is disconnected now. Then we can lift this part here and pull out the cables, so the cables are now free. Now we can remove the 5 bolts we have here. The first bolt is here, and then we have one here. This is actually a nut, and another nut, and another nut here, and another nut there at the back. So the best method to remove the nuts is to just use some grease, and you put the grease inside of the socket. So the grease actually holds the bolt so it doesn't fall inside the engine. Now let me demonstrate. This is the first bolt I am removing. And voila! This is a very nice trick, so you don't lose bolts. And you just have to repeat that for the 4 bolts, and you're done. Now we want to disconnect this top hose that goes from the CCV valve to the intake manifold. We can disconnect it here on this side. We just pull it out. You can help yourself with a flat screwdriver. And it's out. So this will disconnect the CCV system from the intake manifold, so we can remove it easier. Okay, so now we have to remove two more nuts. This is the first one, and here is the second one. This holds the CCV bracket to the intake manifold. So if we remove the two nuts, it will be easier to remove everything, and you'll see later why we had to do this. Make sure you don't drop the nuts. Next you have to disconnect another vacuum hose that goes underneath the intake manifold. This is the hose right here. It has the same system for releasing as the vacuum hose to the CCV valve. So you have to squeeze the tabs and pull the hose out, which is a bit tricky when you are doing it with one hand. So let me show you. This is the hose you have to disconnect. Okay, so we have the vacuum hose disconnected. This is the purge line from the fuel tank. Okay, so we've done the easy part. Now comes the hard part. There are two bolts that hold the intake manifold on the bracket that connects to the engine, and the first bolt is here underneath the ICV valve. I've already removed this bolt, so this is how it looks like. It's T30 Torx, and this screw is here underneath all of this plumbing, and I'll try to show you, although it's kind of hard. Let me remove a couple of things out of the way. Okay, so this bolt goes underneath. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but it goes here underneath all of this plumbing. So this is a very hard bolt to get to, so I've made a special tool. So this is an aluminium handle that fits a T30 bit, and this is what I use to unscrew this bolt. So I go underneath like this, and I use one hand to unscrew this bolt. As you can see, you have very little space here, so you have to have a very small ratchet, or you have to make something similar as I did. So this is probably the best way to get to this bolt. It's a pain in the ass, but well, once you do it, the first time it's hard, but then it gets easier, I guess. And the second bolt is right underneath this plastic rubber. If you imagine a straight line going through here, at the bottom you will find the other bolt where you can access it and unscrew it. You have to jack up the car on the left side, and that's why I have this floor jack here and the stand. So now I'm going to lift up the car and show you where to get to this bolt. Okay, I have the car jacked up. I am using a jack stand for extra safety because you never know when the floor jack can fail, so always be safe. So to get to the last screw you will need a couple of extensions. I am using 3 extensions here to get to this bolt, and the best way to make sure that the bolt doesn't fall into the engine bay when you unscrew it is to use a piece of plastic tube, or in my case this is a electrical shrinking tube. So you put this over your socket and then you cut it to appropriate length, and then this part here fits on the screw head, so when it is released it grips on the head and to the socket, and you can just take it out without any problems. So the same thing goes when you are reinstalling this screw. You just assemble this piece like this and then you screw it in, and when you are finished you just pull it out. Now if this happens and the shrinking tube stays on the bolt, you can just go back in and try it a couple of more times like this, and as you can see everything releases nicely. So this is my hack for my subscribers, my viewers. This is the easiest way to get to this. To get to this bolt you have to go underneath the car with your extra long extension, and then you have to go all the way to the control arm and go right next to the steering column, and then you will see this is where the bolt is. Now I've already removed this bolt, but if you take your extension and your hack contraption, you can reach the bolt from here, but you will need of course light and some patience. Now if you drop the bolt it will fall inside the engine bay and you will have to find it, and this will be a pain in the ass, especially if you have already finished reassembling everything and then you drop the bolt, then you have to repeat everything. So I would suggest you first do this bolt here, and if it goes in well, then you can proceed with other work and finish the job. Now we can finally remove the intake manifold. The best way to do this is to put all of those twisted lines at the back of the manifold. This part is a bit tricky, so make sure you have everything ready and out of the way, and then just pull out the whole thing. Do it slowly. If it gets stuck, don't push it, just wiggle it around until it gets unstuck. It's a good idea to have some WD-40 ready and spray some in the holes where the nuts were. You will probably need a couple of tries to get it right. Okay, and it's out. Now you have to move all of the cables out of the way towards the back. It's finally out. Okay, so this is where the two bolts are. These are the intake manifold gaskets. It's a good idea to change those if they are still original, because you can have vacuum leaks on these seals and this will cause some engine issues. So once you have the intake manifold removed, you can do different jobs like working on your starter motor. Underneath the starter motor is the crankshaft position sensor, and here is your CCV bracket. This is where the CCV lives. Also make sure you inspect all of the CCV hoses. So this hose that goes to the oil pan, and also you can change all of the sensors here. So this is a very common job you have to do when you're working in this part of the N42 engine.